Hello, this is Georgina Rose.
This is Nike.
And this is Anthony.
And welcome to Magnolias and Magic. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a very complex and nuanced topic, and one that I personally have actually written and spoken about a lot, and it's something I think about a lot. And that would be the intersection of technology and the occult. To the outsider, the idea of technology, and in particular paganism, sounds very counterintuitive. When people discuss neo-paganism in mostly an academic or religious scholar's sense, they tend to bring up that it's about a return to nature, a return to our natural roots, and they use this term earth-based paganism a lot. However, what even is paganism? Paganism historically is kind of just a term for other, meaning that this idea that paganism is strictly about earth-based ideas is kind of a newer one, though in historic antiquity-based paganism, nature was a huge feature, with the natural world and the natural progression of the seasons and whatnot being strong theological ideas cross-culturally. So now people are not beginning paganism by how they did in the ancient days, like with their village, or how they did in the 1990s by walking into metaphysical stores and having a chance conversation with an employee. They're starting through their TikTok For You page. They're not starting with, maybe going into the back of a Barnes & Noble and seeing a book on the New Age and then, developing a fascination. People begin online. Most people's first exposure to the occult, who are millennials or Gen Z, is the internet. And some people, stemming out of chaos magic, have decided to actually incorporate the internet into their magic. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the integration of technology into the occult. Let's talk about the pros and the drawbacks to this, how it makes sense when discussing our movement, and everything related to that. So let's break into it. So first, let's talk about the history of this, because sort of the root of this phenomenon is really important. A lot of people think that the idea of social media witchcraft is something that came up in the past 10 years. They think that it's the TikTok teens with their rocks. They're on the For You page, lip syncing. It's the TikTok teens. Oh no, it's the TikTok teens. It's not. Ever since the dawn of the internet, the decentralization of the occult was on its way. I hate to break this to you guys, but it was not the TikTok teens. There have been people posting on the internet about the occult since the internet existed, and really, it's the reality of the situation. I think if you're still clinging to the idea that you can somehow disconnect the two or undo the decentralization that's happened, you're naive, you're lying to yourself. It's a reality that the community is going to be forever changed by this phenomenon. But let's rewind a little bit and let's talk about how we got here, because me saying that may sound a little jarring, so let's talk about how we got here. In Drawing Down the Moon, Margot Adler.
I think it's Margot. I think it's Margot. Yeah.
Margot Adler actually was talking about how in the 1960s and 1970s, a lot of pagans disproportionately worked in the tech sector. And they sort of discussed this, and they're like, well, I do think it's logical that this is where I work and this is my beliefs. And there were a lot of sort of theories, hustling around. Then in the 80s, 90s, 70s, that whole period of time, a movement called chaos magic emerged. Chaos magic had its foundations laid down long before chaos magic as a term was around, with most people citing Austin Osman Spare as the sort of proto-chaos magician, though he would not have called himself that. With writers such as Phil Hine and Peter Carroll, chaos magic became its own movement, and chaos magicians were the first to integrate technology with paganism to our general knowledge. They would do rituals over video conferencing. There's an image of chaos magicians in black robes around a computer that's very famous. It's even on Wikipedia at this point. And they would do things such as making sigils, integrating them inside of images, using audio tracks for magical workings. And generally, they were the first ones to sort of create this whole tech thing. And now there's a bunch of witches who call themselves tech witches. You see the rise of cryptocurrency in relationship to astrology, with people doing crypto astrology predictions. You see people treating the algorithm as an egregore, and it's sort of kind of exploded pretty recently, but the foundations were there for a long time. As well, I think it is instrumental to acknowledge that social media, which you're viewing right now if you're listening to this, is a key part of the occult blowing up in the way it has in the past decade. In multiple countries, neo-paganism is the fastest growing religion. And how that happened is honestly the internet. The internet has exposed so many people to this content, with hashtag witch talk having over 20 billion views. that's pretty impressive. It has more views than hashtag Biden. I think that cannot be underplayed or underestimated.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
And recently, Witch Talk voted a representative into Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania's government. So, I think,
Really?
yeah, they campaigned on TikTok and they
Wow.
got a city council seat, to my knowledge. But yeah, technology and the occult are in bed together right now. And I think there's a lot to discuss with that, because that, of course, has a lot of interesting implications. And it says a lot for how our community is going to look as it moves forward. I think we're already in the state where we're seeing the sort of results of the decentralization that began with the rise of the internet. But I mean, as we move forward 5-10 years, we're going to see even more results. So I think there's, a lot to discuss.
I know I see it a lot more with the younger generation, with obvious reasons. I mean, the younger millennials and the older Gen Z especially are going to be the ones that have a prominent role to play right now and have the most tech savviness to them. Older millennials did grow up with certain parts of those technologies, but they grew up more in the transitional phase of them, where you were still using the old and the new. Younger millennials like myself, I'm right on that millennial Gen Z cusp. I was old enough to remember dial-up internet, but it really wasn't what I learned. What I learned was more of the regular stuff. I had a typing class in elementary school. I was learning to build websites and do coding when I was in elementary, middle school. As some bonus stuff. I have never not had some form of technology. We had a landline in my house, but we also had early cell phones when I was growing up. We had one between my brother and I. So the technological part of our lives it's one of those things that's always been there. So it makes a lot of sense to try to incorporate it into magic, because I mean, what is magic but a tool, and you use what tools you have available to you. So if you have technology and can make it work for your practice in a way that makes sense, it's no wonder that it's such a popular thing right now. Now, it's not going to be for everybody. I know certain people who are younger than I am that are boomers, like Georgina. So it's not for all, but it is certainly something that has reason. It's something that has reason to be as popular as it is, but there are certainly pros and cons for its use, and we have to be able to understand that balance.
Oh yeah, I have a theory about this, and I wrote an essay about this for Gods and Radicals. You can check that out on their website. I actually think the social media rise is part of why paganism is popular again. So when you're online a lot, which a lot of these people are, they're what you would call terminally online. You spend a lot of your time alone in your room staring at a computer, especially with the coronavirus pandemic. People aren't working. People are at their home alone. They feel very alienated and disconnected from the world. And paganism, in a way, sort of scratches that itch, because paganism, in a lot of its sects, not all, of course, has a thing about returning to the land, connecting to the land, talking to the spirits of the place. And that stands in stark contrast to being online. I think people who are very online, they crave that thing that they're missing. They want that nature. They want to feel connected to the cycle of the year that the wheel of the year presents. I think in a lot of ways, this desire to, work with the rocks that are crystals, which are super popular online, to honor the land spirits, connect to the traditions of your people or whatever. I think a lot of that is actually in reaction to being hyper online. So the internet has created this really weird relationship with it, where people through the internet discover what they're missing, and they use the internet as their way of talking to other people and getting their information. Of course, this is not true with the people who actually mix technology and their practice directly together, but I think that's an interesting factor. I'm not going to get too deep into it, because I do have that essay. I'll link it in the YouTube and Spotify descriptions if you want to read.
I think it's really interesting that you bring up this point about how social media and technology is largely responsible for our community growing. And I just remember when I was in my biology class in college, I had to do a research paper about the effects of nature and earth-based like meditation, or just going for a walk, or anything that puts you out in nature, the effects that it has biochemically on your body. And it's interesting because scientists don't completely understand why, but humans benefit on a neurological level from having that interaction with nature. And it leads to what were all the things? I think it leads to decreased levels of cortisol, which is stress hormone. It helps your cell regeneration processes. It helps your circadian rhythm, so you sleep better. Humans get all these natural like benefits, like health benefits and psychological benefits by connecting to nature. And so it's just interesting you're talking about, like, especially during like the coronavirus pandemic when everyone was isolated inside, it was like a lot of people were seeking out that connection, even if they thought it, like, even if they didn't consciously realize they were doing it. It's just interesting that our community benefited from that. And I have so many thoughts about what you're talking about how like internet is like a double-edged sword where like it helps our community grow, but it's also like antithetical to like spirituality and like personal health. So we'll get into all that shit here in a little bit. But anyway, we're talking about techno witchcraft specifically. So let's talk a little bit about how technology actually integrates into witchcraft in certain ways. Because you hit on this stuff about chaos magic from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And like I did a deep dive into like old forums and shit to see like how chaos magicians used to use tech. And like there's some weird stuff out there that they used to do. Like there was one that was super cool where basically it's kind of the same logic of like how you create a sigil. Like you use like your subconscious brain to like process information without you realizing you're doing it. And they tried to use a computer to like mimic that, like an algorithm. And basically this one guy, he took a smoke detector and he hooked it up to like this computer program where it would take like specific electrical signals from the smoke detector and it would create like pixelated art from it. And then he did an entire ritual and like an invocation with this very specific like incense, and he let the incense smoke drift up into the smoke detector, and then the smoke detector took it, processed it through the algorithm, and created a sigil for his like whatever he was doing like in that working. And like that shit just blows my mind. Like chaos magicians are so creative. But like nowadays I don't see a lot of people doing stuff quite that crazy, but like really common examples are like keeping like a digital book of shadows. Like I do that partially. Like emoji spells, like that's a really famous one. Like curating playlists, like there's all kinds of shit we do these days because like you said, Nike, like technology is incorporated into like every aspect of our life. So like what are some ways that you guys use techno witchcraft?
I have my Book of Shadows digitally. I've done the playlist thing. I don't do it a lot, but I definitely use music to set the mood a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I have not done this, but I've seen it done by others with like sigils as their lock screen.
Yeah, I do that one. That one's cool.
Apps and programs are another big one. I have my astrology program. I have astrology apps. I had for a little while in the beginning some tarot apps, but I just found
Mm-hmm.
other ways to use that. And then there's other stuff like doing online readings or online divination, virtual conferences, things like that, and online rituals as well. I did one with Ocean Keltoy and Wolf the Red on their server called The Hold. We did
Mm-hmm.
an online ritual for the goddess Hell recently, and they've done other ones before as well.
What
We
does an
also
online ritual like that look like?
so it's interesting. So they set up a stage, so that's where everybody but the hosts are muted. And then Wolf streams a camera at his altar, and he leads it with like him and Ocean both. They lead it, but for
Mm-hmm.
this one, it was looking at Wolf's altar, and it was in part like if you could not give your sacrifice and your offerings, they were
Mm-hmm.
giving for you should you choose to accept that. So people who are in the broom closet or aren't like physically at home to be able to do it, so they were doing that as like the people leading the ritual. So just being present was part of the experience, but it's
Wow.
also that you follow along. So like
Mm-hmm.
they would say stuff, and then they'd have a repeat after me section, and then whatever offerings you would have to give or things you'd have to say or whatever you wanted to incorporate special would be yours to do on your own.
Led monthly Zoom rituals for like 6 months straight. I would do them via
Mm-hmm.
Zoom. Yeah, they'd be completely open. I got busy, that's why I kind of stopped doing them. But what I would do is I would write up a full ceremonial ritual like a couple days prior and like post the ritual guide or script essentially, and I
Mm-hmm.
would lead it. I'd have my camera on and I would ask people to partake in certain parts if they knew what they were doing. They go well. They're kind of awkward at first, and one of the sort of issues you run into with it is people who don't pull any weight, or they'll like talk during it, and there come to be some like technical issues. But I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it works well. I think it's not, of course, the ideal way to run a group ritual, but realistically, it's really hard to get a lot of people together.
Yeah.
Organizing is tricky, especially when it comes to occultists. Like getting a bunch of people in one place, you kind of have to be in a city, which a lot of people are not in major cities. So, organize-wise, it is pretty useful. I've kept like screenshots of sigils as wallpaper before, but I don't really integrate it that much. I mean, I calculate my planetary hours online, and I store some notes, and like I store some information, like I'll save things on my computer. But I actually find tech kind of distracting during ritual work because social media sort of messes up our focus. It makes us unable to focus on things, and I mean, you can see like attention deficit disorders have like skyrocketed. Like they've gone way up, and I do think technology has some part in that.
Oh yeah, technology, absolutely. I can speak from experience. I don't know about other ADHD people, but like for me, my brain does not do well with a lot of the digital. I have found over the years that I really have to be an analog kind of person. I need to write things down on paper. I need to have a physical notebook where I take my notes, or where I have my, from the pre-show, where I have my physical calendar and my bullet journal. Like I need things to be physical. And so as much as it is convenient to do those things, there's a lot about it that really, really hurts with ADHD. It really sucks. And especially if you're a witch with ADHD, whoo, it's terrible.
No, I completely agree.
For me, I always have to put my phone like far away from wherever I'm doing rituals. I find that I just kind of need to do that. For leading rituals online, what I would do is I would like block my computer from letting me view other tabs. So I make sure I was like focused. Sometimes I would even like face away from the computer so I wasn't looking at it. Because I get distracted easily. Okay, I do not have like iron set focus. I need to do a ritual very well. Be away from that stuff. I'll like get into a trance before or whatever. So for me, I'm definitely not someone who's cut out for tech witchcraft. I find for small things it works. Like I will time when I post things based on planetary hours. I'll use things as my phone backgrounds. But I can't fully integrate my practice because it's just not how my brain works. It's not where my will is. But of course, as a Thelemite, I do believe all our true will is in different places. And I think that the technology thing is a very double-edged sword because it's really opened the floodgates to people who would otherwise really not be able to have the place they have in the community that they do now, which I think is a very good thing. Like as a young woman and a Thelemite, the likelihood that I would be, where I am without the internet, it's not true. Like I would not have the position I'm in, and for that I'm very grateful. I think the internet has also led to a lot of transparency about issues in certain communities, and has allowed us to be honest and converse about how to fix things. The opening of the floodgates has really made things more accessible. It's made it easier for people, for various minority groups, to have access to this material. And in a lot of ways, the death of the gatekeeper has been a very positive thing. But I think it is something that comes with serious drawbacks. It's a nuanced issue, and it's not like we can really undo it at this point. So I don't know. I mean, it's a complicated thing. I think there's no right answer for this whole situation. For integrating tech, if your brain works the way that it works, I find that these people have really successful results. I know this one person who's a programmer and a chaos magician, and they have this like amazing ability to like put sigils and like gematria into their coding. And so they'll like create these websites that utilize the gematria and the specific information. And it's like really, really cool. It's not my cup of tea, but of course we all have our own path. That's one of the joys of this type of spirituality, right? Like you can choose your own path. You can choose your own direction. You're not bound to a rigid orthodoxy.
This is true. Well, it's just interesting, just on a little tangent side note, you're talking about encoding like sigils and gematria into like code and stuff. When I was messing around learning how to do like sound production, when I was making my podcast earlier this year, I encoded a bunch of like numerology, like sacred numerology, into the audio levels as I was like mastering them. And then like I cast a spell using that, and the manifestation worked. I got a ton of engagement out of nowhere. So like there's some legitimacy to that.
I want to share something small and dumb that I did recently.
Yes, please.
So as part of a small ritual, it involved like, you can sacrifice something, and the historical stuff is sometimes you sacrifice an animal, like a goat. I don't have a goat, obviously, and I don't personally do animal sacrifice. It's just like not my thing. Like I might sacrifice food or something, but I don't like buy an animal to kill and whatever, because I don't live in an area where that's like a feasible thing. But I did substitute with saving a picture of a goat on my computer, and then I deleted it. I emptied the recycle bin, so I sacrificed the goat. It like symbolically.
I mean, that's not a bad idea. That's actually kind of clever.
I thought it was really fun. I thought it was funny.
I find a lot of the social
my
media
God.
tech magic is always very clever.
Yes,
It's always very crafty, and it does work.
I went on
Emoji
test tubes
spell.
and cauldrons and talked about this too. I don't know if I told you guys. We had a discussion about, like, in part tech witchcraft and sigil emojis and stuff, but I talked about like different ways that you can incorporate it. The best thing I've come up with that I thought was really, really fun was, if you want a digital poppet, you make somebody in The Sims and you do to them what you want to happen. So if you want good things, you could like make their life go well, give them a bunch of money. You could do it on The Sims. You can make it look like them. You can give it their name. You can give it their birthday or their zodiac sign. I don't know which one, but you can like add personal information. You could recreate their home if you know what their home looks like, and you can like do things to this sim that you want to happen to them. So if you hate them, you could torture them. If you like them, you can give them a bunch of money.
Podcasts do not endorse torture. We torture in Sims.
Well,
okay,
like
in the Sims.
how you might stab a poppet in a certain area, you would have something happen to that part of their body or something.
Yeah.
Like, we do not endorse violence on the Magnolias and Magic podcast. In Sims, you can burn people alive in
The
Sims.
In the Sims. Yeah, in the Sims.
Real life, please.
So, like, you could give them a bunch of money, have them fall in love. Like, you could do that. I thought that was so clever. I thought it was so fun to just be like, you could do this thing.
Yes. Okay, I do that. I've done that before.
Yes.
Like, high key, I didn't even realize what I was doing at first, but like there's been a couple periods of time in my life where like I'm dealing with some like really, it's usually has something to do with money. Like I need to attract like a bunch of money or whatever, and so I like to decompress from that stress. I would get onto The Sims, and I would not accidentally, but just like subconsciously make myself and like all my roommates in The Sims, and then I would just like turn us into little workhorses. And like we would work and accumulate like a shit ton of money in The Sims, and I would be like, okay, cool, there's my motivation. But then later on I realized I could use that as a spell, and so I actually did that. I put like on anointing oil on my hands. I did like an entire little trance thing beforehand, and then I just spent a couple hours like generating a bunch of money on The Sims, and I did like a money spell doing that. Like it worked. It actually
there you
worked. Like that shit's crazy.
I'm saying Sims based.
Okay, I will say The Sims are based.
Yay! Yeah. I win.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about tech magic is it certainly works. Whether you like it or not, or feel like it's antithetical to the nature of paganism or whatever, I mean it does work. Like, there's this one form of tech magic that I really hate, called Emoji Spells. It's where you put a series of emojis in a row and make that a spell. And Emoji Spells make my skin crawl. I hate them.
Charge, reblog to cast.
Yeah, they were a big thing on Tumblr in the Tumblr days, where they would like make a series of emojis, like they'd be like all the money emojis and like smile faces, and it'd be like to cast, reblog, like to charge, reblog to cast.
Yeah.
And they make me cringe really hard, but by the logic of sigil magic, they should actually work, and that makes me angry, but it does work logically. So I do not claim that emoji spells actually make sense when you view the world through a chaos magic framework, but they do.
I claim.
Also, there was the meme magic thing that happened where people they tried to make like meme magic a thing.
Like, what do you mean? Like, they create an egregore with it, or like?
Yeah, it was like egregore stuff. They were trying to make like, they're like memes in a sense are magic because mimetic imagery, it sticks into your head and you can spread messages through mimetic imagery. So they had the idea of like memetics as a form of magic. So in essence, a meme is of course kind of a tag lock for an idea. And when you share it, it spreads. That was kind of the logic of the meme magic thing. That kind of died off by now. But it was an interesting idea, and it does make sense.
Yeah, that's crazy. Oh my goodness.
This is what we mean about tech magic being so creative. Stuff like this. Like, who would ever think of this? It's wild.
This is true. Okay, a question on that, just to relate it to like the emoji magic. I found myself doing this without even realizing it. Do you guys ever like encode like even like itty bitty little bits of magic into like emojis you use like in Twitter posts or like on your Twitter bio or Instagram bio or anything? Because I've met people who do that before. Like they'll like input like specific energies, like when they put like an emoji on their bio or something.
No, I don't do that.
No, I don't
I
do
can
that.
see people
That's
who
smart.
do it. I just don't.
That's
Mhm.
smart.
That makes sense. I think I heard about that from Viv actually, but I could be wrong. But anyway.
That's pretty smart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no. Tech magic is creative. There was a trend, it kind of died off. For a while, people were getting really into using astrology to predict the fluctuations of various cryptocurrencies. As well, people who are into NFTs. I know some chaos magicians have made like sigil NFTs. So like there
Interesting.
is this kind of crypto magic community. It seems like the fad has kind of passed, but there are still people who do it. But
There
it was
is
very
some
much
validity to it. Like it's very hard to predict. I would say it's almost harder because of it being a non-tangible thing. It's much harder to track how some of these work because astrology is such a physical experience so much of the time. Like
Mhm.
an event happening still has physical elements to it. One of the things that was in my bullet journal that I had for the pre-show that I showed, the astrology phase, was an event that happened, but it was based on physical events, and you could see the physical events lining up with that. So
Mhm.
it's harder in some ways. You have to very much have a different kind of understanding of astrology and how those things could be transmuted to work for something non-tangible like that.
Mhm.
But there was a certain amount of validity to it. It's just different.
That makes sense. Did you ever do any crypto astrology?
I did a little, but
Uh-huh.
it's there's just so much more to it because I don't understand crypto as much. Like full
Yeah.
transparency, I did buy some Bitcoin and it has gone up since I bought it. So
Yeah.
if I were to go sell, I could make a little bit of money off of it. But I don't know enough to really get into it. I never understood how everything works. I don't really understand NFTs. I don't understand like why they work the way they work or how people make new crypto or like the tiny crypto I don't remember the terms, but like the really tiny coins, I think they're shit coins or something like that.
Yeah, the
Mhm.
shit coins are the small
like
ones.
doing with those that have a lot of fluctuation and working with those rather than Bitcoin, which is more like a buy during a really low dip and you hold forever because it went
Mhm.
from like 60 to 29 back to 60 again. I don't know
Mhm.
what it's at currently, but like it has those big fluctuations, but they're over longer periods of time. So it's like
Yeah.
that's all I know about it. I don't really know how to play the game. I just bought some Bitcoin and held it, and now it's gone up a little bit.
Okay, question within that. Have you ever done any like Astro Finance like with investing outside of Bit or like out of crypto?
I've never had enough money to invest until very recently, and even then, I don't want to touch that money because it's not that much.
Yeah.
So I would like to in the future, but I would probably base that more off of my chart and when it would be a good time for me to
Ooh.
invest versus the thing I'm investing in. Now, I could do it with stocks,
Mhm.
certainly, but I also don't know how stocks work. So it would probably
Yeah.
just be like throwing it into some sort of investment thing with a bank or something like one of those
Mhm.
things, which I also do not understand.
That
Uh,
makes sense.
so it would be more of like when is my time to invest? Like
Yeah.
my second house year would have been the best time to invest.
Ooh, that's good to know. I'm coming up on my second house here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's that. But tech witchcraft has so many pros and cons. I want to go over the pros first because I do want to shed some positivity on it because
Okay.
there's plenty bad about tech
Yeah.
witchcraft. I mean, it's really accessible for one. Like for the most part, almost everybody has access to technology in some form. It could even be at like the public library. The information age, the internet, and physical pieces of tech like your phone or your computer, they are cheaper on the grand scale, relatively so. Phones are a little bit more expensive, but like computers, you can get pretty cheap. You can get a decently cheap like laptop, and from there, like a tablet. My tablet's $50 because it's an Amazon Fire. I could access the internet on that.
Mhm.
There's really cheap ways to access technology and information to be able to join in on these communities to get the information. You can get like digital books, so like if you don't have the room, and it even saves you a little bit of money for funds wise. So the accessibility part is big. There's also like a decentralization. It's not like they are kept in a specific physical location. You can get this information anywhere, and you can
Mhm.
access these groups from anywhere. And for those with certain forms of disability, it can also allow you to engage with these communities more than you would have been able to previously without. So being able
Mm-hmm.
to do these online rituals, these Zoom conferences, to be able to just speak with other practitioners in general, like having access to the internet to find other people, like that accessibility is really, really big. And I think that might be the biggest pro in my book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's also nice the rise of so recently, and this really happened over COVID, but it's still maintained into the present, where a lot of conferences have gone digital. So these big occult conferences will, some of them they'll do like in person, and you can buy a streaming ticket, or they'll be entirely digital, so you can see teachers from cities that you could, not even afford to go to. You can see lectures from occultists over in Europe. You can see
Mm-hmm.
them from across the country, and it's typically a cheaper ticket than what a traditional conference's ticket would be. You can see all these people from so far away. As well, certain occult shops do digital classes, so you can like buy their class. A lot of teachers in the occult have moved to online teaching, so it makes it very accessible if you're someone who, say, lives in a rural area far from any major cities. So in that way, it's been really great. I mean, I've attended some amazing online lectures that I feel very privileged to have attended. That I would not have otherwise been able to go to, because obviously, like, getting out to an occult store can be a bit of a hassle depending on where you live.
Mm-hmm. But one aspect of that, like accessibility, that I've thought about a lot when we were outlining for this episode is, how do I want to say this? Basically, like there's like there's like it. I kind of think of it as like the buyer side and the seller side. Like there is the audience side of the internet, like the greater occult community, like however you want to term it with an umbrella term. There's like all the people who consume the occult content, which are like just lay people that are coming in, and that's the part that's like rapidly growing, right? But then the other side of the accessibility that I've heard a lot of like authors and like creators talk about is like, especially ones who have been in the community for a couple decades, is like up until like 2005, 2006 on, there was not really a way to like reach a lot of people about paganism. And so like a lot of educators relied on like course catalogs, I think, were really big. And then like there were some really obscure forums that popped up like in the 90s. And then other than that, it was mostly like in-person meetup groups. And like a lot of these places were very small. They were run by word of mouth or like through advertisements in like the newspaper or magazines or like the back of books you'd get in like Barnes and Noble or something. But like it was all very through the grapevine. It was all very contained, and there wasn't a good way to like expand the community. But then once the internet came about and social media became a thing and like content creators became a thing, a lot of people were able to like actually dedicate serious time towards becoming an occult author or becoming an occult teacher. Like they were able to grow a business and expand it to the point where it like actually sustained them as a person, and like they could quit their day job or minimize their hours at their day job. And like it seemed, from my perspective, it seems like it allowed the community to like reinvest in itself in a lot of ways. And like since then, like as much as we've seen like consumption of occult content go through the roof, really, we've also seen like an explosion of content creators, like, which is good and bad. I think it's mostly good, but I also see a lot of bad in it. Like you're saying, there's pros and cons. But like, yeah, I think it's interesting how that accessibility just like goes all the way around the community.
Oh yeah, I mean the I think of it in the terms of it opened the floodgates. So
Yeah, right.
people were able to, make occultism their career. People were able to devote more time, but at the same time, it takes less to become an authority figure than it once did, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
anyone can amass a large following so long as you like know how to work social media and you're smart enough. Like there are certain cons of that, but at the same time, there's a level of transparency there now is, right? Like if there's a teacher who's been in the community for decades and they're hurting members of the community, people online, they can share that and people can
Yep.
know. So
Exactly.
it's a very double-edged sword. And I think like you can't really decide whether it's good or bad. I think it's just a thing that happened and it's got, there's pros and cons either way. I think one of the most beautiful things is, of course, the accessibility. I think that divinity is for everyone. I don't think the gods are owned by anything. I think
Mm-hmm.
they can work with whoever they want, and the internet has allowed that to happen. As
Yeah.
well, the rise of occult social media has made the occult more socially acceptable. It's normalized us. The rise of the trope of the astrology girl in mainstream culture has normalized
Yeah.
the occult. We're seen as much less weird. Those really cringy documentaries that like sites like BuzzFeed put out, they make us look like normal people.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've been normalized in a lot of ways, which, to be honest, I'd rather be normalized and seen as like
What?
astrology girls than how it was in the 80s when there was the satanic panic.
Yeah,
Well, even astrology is seen as
exactly.
satanic in certain circles. Like
Yeah.
that, there was a discussion within the church ages ago about whether or not astrology should be allowed at all, or whether or not it. I don't know if it was meant to be illegal, but whether or not they would view it as satanic and pagan because it did have pagan origins. So, like, there is a history. I would much rather just be like, oh, you do astrology, cringe, cringe,
Yeah,
cringe,
versus
astrology
like
girl, versus
burning
trying to
down
kill
your
me.
house.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, I
Yeah,
100%.
it's much better now. Like to
Yes.
be in look, let's be real. Being a practitioner now is better than it was like 100 years ago. Okay? I think that's pretty inarguable. There have been problems with all of this. Yeah. But I'd rather be a practitioner now than like 200 years ago.
This is true.
So there's another thing about this, the pro that I don't know that I would label it as a pro of like this is super good and more of like this is interesting. So I'll just read this as it was written, to be honest. If our spells work in cyberspace, what does that reveal about the nature of reality? So it brings up these new questions like that, like about how magic works in general, what things can be considered part of that. Can technology be considered magical? Can it be considered part of nature in any way? Does it have to be strictly nature and natural, or can it involve things that are man-made? And how does technology intersect with, reality and astral travel and those things sort of off in the closer to the divine realms? How do those things interact? And since it's so new, I mean, if we go with the let's say 70s was solidly when tech was really starting to get going. We've only had about 50 years where tech has been really big and booming compared to literally thousands of years of magical theory and magical practice to reference and go back to and to evolve and change and turn into what it is today. We have 50 years, a scant breath on the wind compared to those thousands and thousands of years of magical traditions and religious practices. So I don't think we'll have those answers for a long time, but it is interesting to ponder. Like, why might a sim work just as well as a physical puppet you have in your hand? If you can't anoint it with oils or herbs, can it still work? Like, what makes something work in that way is the very interesting question that gets brought up, and I don't have an answer for it. I just think it's cool.
Yeah, no, that's like the biggest thing that was coming to me when I was thinking about this question was like it highlights a very important aspect, which is like you said, why does any of this work? And like I think that is an extremely subjective question. I think you're going to get a billion different answers from every occultist on the planet. But like I think about this in a couple different ways. So like on the one hand, we go back to Margot Adler in Drawing Down the Moon, where she interviewed tons and tons and tons of different occultists all over the country from a billion different paths. And she was talking to all these different people who worked in tech, and they came up with all these like really interesting, bless you. They
Thank
came
you.
up with all these really interesting, like really weird explanations for like why they were drawn to working in tech, and almost all of them had something to do with like it related back to their spirituality. And like the really cool ones in my opinion were like they viewed computers as like elementals in disguise. Like they thought that they were literally nature spirits that had just like taken on a new form in the modern world. Or like another one was like one lady was talking about, oh God, I wish I could remember her name. I need to go back and reread that book. But basically she was talking about it's a very similar way in that like a tarot deck operates. A little bit, it leans a little bit more on the psychological model, but the idea is like our tools are extensions of like our subconscious, or like our divine spirit, or like whatever you want to say makes our magic work. The tools we use are an extension of that, and they're ways that help us like access it. And so like in the same way that like you use a set of tarot cards to like access different aspects of your subconscious, you could use a computer to do the same thing. And so like in like a big thing that a lot of chaos magicians used to do was like role-playing games like on the internet, but they would take it a step further, and like they would treat it as like almost like an invocation, or like a divine play, where like they would take on like different roles of like nature spirits or gods, and they'd basically do what you were talking about, where like they do an entire ritual over the internet, but all these different people all over the globe would be involved channeling all this energy at the same time, and they all claimed that it worked just like as if you had been in person, except you weren't in person. And so like that rubs a lot of like our traditional notions the wrong way. And then like on the other side of things, like I don't know, a big pushback I think against tech witchcraft is like a lot of people see it as unnatural, and like we even talked about this a little bit, like it pulls you away from nature. But like if you view it from a different perspective, like if you examine like just like some of our tools right now, like I have a little bowl right next to me that I keep on my altar, or like an athame or things like that, like we take those for granted in some ways as like just seeming more natural because they're like more primitive than our modern world. But like back when those tools were created thousands of years ago, that was cutting edge technology. And I'm sure that there could have been people back then that said it was unnatural or whatever. And
Oh
so
yeah.
like,
The printing press, people were mad
yes,
about it because people would like forget how to handwrite or whatever, and it took jobs away from the monks transcript. Yeah,
exactly. Like
100%.
you're gonna like lose your brain because you're reading books and not going
Um,
outside, or like
literally written language was railed against. I think it was
yes.
Greek philosophers. They were talking about like writing becoming more accessible instead of having to like inscribe it in stone tablets. They were like,
Mhm.
their brains will rot because they no longer have to remember all of the oral information. Literally, any amount of
Exactly.
change and progress has always been fought against by people who are pro tradition. So there will always be some pushback against it because it is viewed as this new cool thing, but in a couple thousand years, it's old and normal and natural feeling because we're so used to it.
Exactly. Like there's maybe theoretically there's gonna point when like we have computer chips in our brain and people are gonna be like, oh my god, I can't believe you used to have computers outside of your body, and like, oh
Yeah.
my god, how primitive. Like, and so within that spirit, like if we can very naturally like say channel like an elemental energy through like an athame, who's to say that maybe witches like 200 years from now could naturally channel like the air element from like a computer or like something like that. And there, that same woman in Drawing Down the Moon, she actually talked about how when she was like on the road, because she was like a businesswoman, when she was on the road, she would use like a calculator to represent like earth energy. She would use a stapler to represent like, I think it was fire energy or something. And like she would just use like her little like things that she had in her office or wherever she was as like her prop tools for like the elements. And like she would find ways to incorporate technology into like, it almost came off like folk witchcraft. She would find ways to use the technology around her to do magic, and like it worked for her. And so like I don't know, I think it highlights loopholes in like it doesn't highlight loopholes, but like I think the ground that the community stands on like philosophically is like based on a lot of abstraction and metaphor, and not a lot of people take the time to dig down into like what that really means. And so when things like tech witchcraft work, it kind of like shakes up their whole worldview if they haven't thought about it hard enough.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't think about why magic works. Like, a lot of people, you can point at lavender and they can tell you what it means, but they don't know why, right? Like, a lot of people do not learn the theory and the philosophy behind magic. There's a lot of factors as to why that is a thing. That could be a whole episode. But, a lot of people don't know why things work, so they find it very jarring when something they wouldn't expect actually works. A lot of this technology, in my opinion, does work because it is still part of the material plane. You are still creating a microcosm that then impacts the macrocosm. If you believe in a chaos magic framework or a psychological framework, makes a lot of sense. Um, I think there are some. I think there is some credence though to the paganism as antithetical to technology argument. Um, Mostly because when we talk about those earlier technologies, they're still different than what we would call like modern technology because the internet is overtaking our lives in a different way. Our lives are becoming digitized. We at this point, like people work through the computer. The computer sort of keeps us separate from each other and has done a lot of damage to communities across the board. A lot of people spend a lot of time in their home on their computer instead of at work socializing. Facebook has announced a thing called the Meta, which the Meta will genuinely attempt to blend technology into the modern life. So you have to have like basically a glass on to completely understand reality around you. I think there are valid critiques of this because we are noting that during the COVID pandemic, people felt very alienated. The rates of depression did skyrocket. There was essentially a mental health crisis, and a lot of these mental health services were overwhelmed. A lot of people cannot learn at the same efficiency through digital online classes. I know a lot of people really struggle with that. So I think it is a little different than, say, the development of the printing press, because unlike the printing press, you can just like leave it alone. Technology you can't avoid. There's no way to really function in modern society without some access to technology. Even like to pay, you have to have a card to swipe. Here in New York, if you like lose your vaccine information, they can't give you a second card. You have to get it on your computer and like carry that around. Like it's very difficult to function without some level of internet access. So I think it is a little bit different than things like the printing press. I do think some of the tech fear is just traditionalism, reactionary stuff, but I think there are some valid concerns. personally, I think like this alienation is one of the big ones, just because a lot of people do feel disconnected. So stuff like that. I mean, I think it's a big trade off, and I think there is some legitimacy to the idea that it is a different thing. I think like tech witchcraft and traditional earth based pagan paths are very different. I think like you can't really connect to the land spirits through a laptop. I think there's a lot of value in merging the two, like doing some tech witchcraft, doing some more like old school occult stuff, merging it together. Like maybe you time your rituals and you calculate the timing on your computer. But I think there are some clear drawbacks. I mean, we talk a lot about sort of the cons of social media and stuff like that on this podcast. We've discussed. There's a lot of issues with it. But I think that it's a nuanced discussion. I don't have a wholly positive or a wholly negative opinion on the whole thing. But I think it is a little different than these past technological revolutions.
I think the biggest thing for me is like I'm all for technology. I think technology is great, and I think it has helped and will continue to help a lot of people. But I think where the problem comes in for me as far as like spirituality or like the rest of our life is when technology becomes like exploitative or like harmful without like taking accountability for itself. And like one thing that like just like this is just an anecdote, but like this is something that fucked me up in the head. Like our technology, you were talking about our technology in the modern day is different from like any technology that's ever been created. One aspect of that is like our LED screens that we've used like in computers or TVs like ever since way back when, like ever not way back when, but like decades ago. The LED screens are like the first artificial thing humanity has ever created that uses blue light. And like blue light in nature only occurs in the sky when the sun is out. And so like our circadian rhythms are hardwired to see blue light, and we release a hormone that like keeps us awake. And then when the blue light goes away, the hormone goes away, and we fall into like our sleep cycle. And so like with this blue light LED screen that is suddenly all over the planet, like that is something that doctors have noted like all over the world for decades, is that our circadian rhythms are not the same as they were like 100 years ago, because like we're exposing ourselves to blue light like all day long, all day, every day. And there I don't remember the name of the study. I wish I could remember it, but I'll have to look it up later. But there was basically a study done where a bunch of scientists took a bunch of people and they isolated them from technology for like 6 months or something, just to see like what their natural sleep cycle would fall into. And what they found is that humans actually sleep in two different sections. Like we go to sleep sometime around sundown, we sleep for like 4 to 5 hours, and then we're supposed to wake up for like another 2 to 3 hours in the middle of the night, and then we go back to bed until the sun comes up. And that's like our natural, most restful state that we can be in. Like that's when our cells function optimally, all that good shit. But like with these blue light LED screens, like that doesn't happen anymore. And it's just like just staring at an LED screen for like 2 seconds can fuck that cycle up for like 2 years or something, I think the statistic was. And so like just within that aspect, like if you value like getting back to nature, traditionalism, or like earth-based spirituality or anything like that, like if your goal is to live like a natural lifestyle, like just the simple act of looking at an LED screen can fuck that up dramatically. And so like there's so many, like I don't know if you guys ever watched the show The Good Place, but like they talk about that extensively in there, where like in the modern world, like any decision you make has a billion externalities that like you don't even think about because like no one ever tells you about it. And so like just the simple act of choosing to like look at a cell phone for like a split second, like that can be enough to undo it. And so it's just, I think for me, that's where like it comes in, is like technology has a lot of aspects that like fuck with us in ways that we don't realize. And then like on top of that, if you throw social media into it, the algorithms are built to be like exploitative on top of that. Like they're meant to play off of our insecurities. They're meant to like re-engage us into using them nonstop. Like it's just, there's technology in and of itself isn't what I have a problem with. It's all the shit built into it, or like all the problems that come with it.
Can we talk about the algorithm stuff?
Yes, please.
So with the accessibility and the larger community and all that comes, unfortunately, a larger ability to do harm. Much as we have an ability to see through that bullshit and learn history and all that, there's also a lot of people who are uninformed or don't have the training or learning to see through that, and they fall for stuff really easily. I see this a lot with grifters who fake credentials. The one I hate the most is these really generic readings, and I see it with astrology, I see it with tarot. I'll see people be like, air signs, Gemini, Aquarius, and Libra. This is a reading for you. And then they give some generic bullshit. And it's like, that's none of that has to do with any of the astrology happening right now, because like the difference of whether or not they are a fixed cardinal or mutable sign is big. If something's happening in that sign, like something's going to affect Gemini's way differently than it's going to affect Libras. So it's this whole thing. And then the other one is like, important dates coming up this month by sign, but none of the dates correspond to any astrological event at all. So they're just making it up for nothing. And so there's no correlation to it, but people fall for it because they're really generic messages like, you should love yourself more. Take more time for you. You've been feeling really out of it lately, haven't you? We're in the middle of a pandemic. Everybody's feeling out of it and could take more time for themselves. Okay, this is going to resonate with literally everyone on the planet right now. But okay, the generic grifting, and then they make giant platforms off of it. I don't know what the actual biggest channels are. I haven't ever looked, but like, let's say hundreds of thousands on YouTube of people just being like, "Oh, thank you, that I resonate with this so much." Like, yeah, so did I, and I'm not in that category. I don't have any placements for this thing. There's no astrology to it. And same thing with tarot. Tarot for this month for these signs, for air signs, and it's just the same thing. So the ability to grift, the same thing goes with like cults. We've seen online cults rising. The ability to either misinform or to do harm or to take money from people or doing it for social media clout, whatever, like the stuff that come with social media as well, it's so much bigger than it ever used to be. Like there was a kind of cult era in like the 60s and 70s. I think this is the new cult era, to be honest.
Oh, well, it's so much easier to be a cult leader through the internet than it is to like start a compound. It's a lot easier to be a digital cult leader. I'm gonna be honest. There are a lot of people who exploit the occult and paganism for money. There are people who pretend to be pagans when they're not. That's like the true definition of a grifter, by the way. A true grifter is someone who doesn't actually believe what they're selling at all. The algorithms rate your appearance. So if you're an attractive person, it's easier to gain success, which that has no correlation with being a good occultist. The algorithms do not rate content based on quality. They rate content based on whatever they're programmed to rate it on, and the algorithms are constantly changing. There have been a lot of exposés about TikTok's algorithm in particular, recommending people who are thin and pale-skinned higher than anyone else in the algorithm. Algorithms and tech platforms also have the ability to censor. So I've had a lot of issues with Instagram censorship. It's a long story. We can talk about that at some point. But if they don't like you, they can just deplatform you. And if you're deplatformed, you can't reach anyone. Like, no one's joining these fringe social media platforms. So if your idea is not considered, like, acceptable by the tech companies, it can be, like, blasted out of existence. And since everyone's finding the occult online, you can blast out entire ideas, like, entire belief sets, if they somehow get banned. And certain platforms have been sort of outed for having an anti-pagan bias. Pagan creators get shadow banned. And so in a way, this reliance on these big social media platforms can kind of bite us in the ass because they have so much power. Like they can really control like entire thought movements. It's kind of crazy, like the power that these companies have. And like I'm a big believer that social media, I mean, that's why we all make content. Obviously, we're not anti-social media, or why would we be content creators? But like, if the internet one day decides to just ban us everywhere, we can't reach anyone. And that's kind of scary. Like recently, Facebook had this big, they went out for like a day. And a lot of people lost their entire like contacts of people they know because they didn't have their phone number because they relied on things like Facebook Messenger. Like TikTok, when they thought they were going to ban it, a lot of creators really panicked because they were going to lose like their entire archive of teaching.
I saw a lot of people moving to YouTube. They started backing their videos up on places like YouTube, on Instagram. Now I'll see stuff that's cross-posted to 3 or 4 platforms at a time. So if they're on, it could be like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, all have the same video on it, in part for algorithm reasons and whatever, but in part because they want to have a backup for that stuff because it just disappears.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I remember like when there was a period of time where I tried to get into YouTube a couple of years ago, and like it was right during that period when like the government was like, I don't think it was the FDA. I think it was the FCC, I don't remember. Somebody was suing YouTube, and basically they said like you can't like market to kids, like you can't put all your algorithm shit towards kids because
You
like it
can't
fucks
put
their
ads
brains
on
up.
kids' videos.
Yeah, exactly. And so they like went through that entire like little Armageddon where like they had to redo their entire terms of service, and like there was a solid like 3 or 4 months where I knew a bunch of YouTube creators who thought they were going to lose their entire platform, like they were going to get demonetized or taken down or like any number of shit. I know people who like left YouTube because of that. Like they said it just wasn't worth it. Like it was going to be heartbreaking if they lost all their stuff. Like, and like that's like just a whole platform. Like that, some people make their entire lives off of that. Or like if nothing else, like they have entire like not fan bases, I don't want to call it a fan base, but like they have a community, like they have an entire
Yeah.
community there that is like a system for them, and like if that platform goes away, it's just gone. And so I agree with you. I think it's crazy that they have that kind of power over us.
Yeah, it's kind of a lot. It's so weird how much power they have.
We could also talk about the power that social media has over our practices.
Oh, it does.
Ooh,
And
yes.
if you've talked to anyone who works at a metaphysical shop within the past year, ask them how often they get asked about 2 things. Moldavite, carnelian.
Yep.
Ask them that question. How often they get asked about Moldavite? And they will look at you with like death in their eyes. They'll be like,
I've seen Temp give us that exact look.
like, it has serious sway over our community. And even in my personal practice, I've taken influence from the internet. I totally have.
I'm not ashamed of it.
Yeah, like, part of how I discovered all this shit is going online. Like, I didn't begin as part of an in-person community. I found this all through the internet and, like, 2 people I knew. So, I mean, in a way, like, the internet is how we're here right now making this podcast. So,
exactly.
It's just crazy.
I mean, like when I first joined, like I practiced some form of occultism for like over a decade, but then like I joined Twitter, like I think it was almost like 18 months ago now or so. But like I found Olivia, I found Matt, I found Nike, and I found Georgina, and like you 4 were the ones that like whipped me into shape basically, because like you all had such different perspectives on like different parts of the community that I had never fucking heard of before. And so like I had just been practicing my like folk witchcraft, like Hecatean, whatever the fuck, for like years. And then I knew of Crowley, I knew of the Chaos Magicians, I knew of like the Nordic pagans, like I knew of all these communities, but I didn't realize like we're a tapestry that blends together until I saw all of your guys' content. And like that was after I had been reading and practicing for like over a decade. And like somehow I just missed that, like because it just never got communicated. Like I never was part of any group or anything, and like I just read the wrong books, I guess. And so like once I became a part of the internet, like it really was like I got plugged into the greater community, which like I don't even know if that you could say that existed before social media, but like once I got plugged into the community, like here we are, like there's an entire world of us.
Yeah, the online community is a big tent community. In-person communities tend to be more specified. There's some communities that are like non-denominational, but the majority are like Wiccan covens, Thelemic orders, Rosicrucian groups. Like they're very typically ideologically based, whereas online it's a big tent community. We're not really divided into subsections online. Like of course there are sort of niches within, but we all interact. Like we all share Twitter communities, we share space. We're not really separated in the way we used to be. And I actually personally like the big tent community. I actually prefer it because I think it allows for an ideological discourse that's really helpful. I think in general, even though we all have different perspectives, we can learn a lot from people we disagree with. And I think those conversations are really important. A lot of the most interesting theological discussions I've had have been with people who are of wildly different paths. And I'm really grateful for those discussions. I think they are some of the most interesting ones. And I really like that we can sort of bridge these differences together and have big conversations. Of course, that does lead to like some debates over who's right about certain ideas, miscommunications. Different communities are going to have different values and different principles. And so, of course, there's going to be some clashes there. But in general, I actually like the exchange of ideas that are happening online. And I think our forefathers who, you know, they would occasionally engage with people from other cultures and have cultural exchange, but it was not at the same level that there is now. I think they would be really jealous of us, to be honest.
I agree.
I can only imagine how like Abraham of Worms, who wrote the Abramelin ritual, who literally like traveled around the world to talk to mystics of other cultures, would feel being able to just do it on Twitter.
Yeah,
like, I think it's kind of beautiful and amazing in that way. That's one of my favorite technology perks. So my final thoughts are that regardless of whether we like it or not, the decentralization has happened. Technology is part of our everyday lives. It's in every second, it's in every moment. You can try to make your spirituality void of that, or you can embrace it. It's up to you. Neither of those answers are correct or wrong. Both do seem to work. However, I do think this is something as a community we should reflect upon, because the issues within the online community and the issues with technology is something we can adapt to and figure out solutions to if we desire. So I think it's like something that we need to really honestly look at. I think a lot of people have this tendency to go, well, it's just the teens on the internet. It doesn't actually matter. What happens online isn't real. That's a lie. The internet is still reality. A lot of people think it isn't, but it is. What happens online bleeds into the real world because, disappointingly, every person you engage with on the internet is a real human being who, like, walks outside. Can be shocking, since there are some very terminally online people, but they are human beings. They do breathe, they have bodies, they move around. So I think we should take this stuff seriously, and I think we should genuinely assess it with an honest view. I think a lot of people try to like write it off and forget that the majority of the community are solitary practitioners, and those people are people having the same experience as we are.
You want to see how fast I can speed run this final thought?
Yes.
My final thoughts are, technology is something that requires balance, so make sure you have a balanced relationship with it. And if you don't, assess in what way it is unbalanced.
That was beautiful. My final thoughts are that I think that as a species, we are in the middle of a giant revolution, technologically and otherwise. And I think that technology is going to become an increasingly crazy and integrated part of our life. And as pagans or practitioners of witchcraft or occultism or any denomination thereof, I think we need to be ready for that. And if you are very against tech, I think you need to figure out a way to reconcile that, because it's not going away anytime soon. And if you are for tech, just make sure you are using it ethically, make sure you're aware of all the ways that it exploits you, and make sure that you are using it and it is not using you.
And patrons, you help support the show, so we get to thank you by name if you do $10 or up. So special thank yous to Adrius, Amy, Evan, Hamda, Halsey, Jonah, Lita, A Sociology of Tarot, Alejandra, Angry Pratt, I see that you're new, hello, Anna, Doitsu, Jay, Jessica, Lee, Leo, Lilith, Marcelo, Marshall, Mike, MK Scorpio 89, Nauseated, Neon, Nicole, Rowan, The Lady Ghost, and Victoria. Thank you all. You really make a difference in our lives, and we appreciate you very much.
Yes,
and if you want to support the show and keep us doing this for some reason, you can join our Patreon. You get extended shows, pre-shows, your name read off, and extra shows every Sabbath or so. If you want to find me, I am Georgina Rose, or Dot Darling, DAT. I am on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Telegram, YouTube, Patreon, and everywhere that is mainstream social media, excluding Facebook, because Facebook is for boomers. I'm under Dot Darling, DAAT. As well, if you want to read that article that I mentioned that's very relevant to this topic, it is on Gods and Radicals Press's website. I'm very proud of it. So check that out.
You mean to say you're on Instagram for now?
For now. I'm on Instagram, hopefully by the time this comes out.
Yeah. And I'm Nike. You can find me at the Warrior Witch Nike pretty much everywhere. There's no the. It's Warrior Witch Nike. I have a link tree. You can find me. The links are in the descriptions. I'm around. Search Warrior Witch Nike. I'm very cool.
If you want to reach me, I am Anthony Wolfe. I go by Anthony the Witch on social media. I think you can find me on Instagram and Twitter, and that is about it until further notice.
And this has been Magnolias and Magic.